Chapter 16 of Zadig. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Michelle White. Zadig, or The Book of Fate, by Voltaire. Chapter 16. The Tournaments. The Queen was received at Babylon with all the transports of joy that could possibly be expressed for the safe return of so illustrious and so beautiful a personage that had run through such a long series of misfortunes. Babylon, at that time, seemed to be perfectly serene and quiet. As for the young prince of Hyrcania, he was slain in battle. The Babylonians, who were the victors, declared that Astarte should marry that candidate for the crown, who should gain it by a fair and impartial election. They were determined that the most valuable post of honor in the world, namely that of being the royal consort of Astarte and the sovereign of Babylon, should be the result of merit only, and not be procured by any party factions or court intrigues. A solemn oath was voluntarily taken by all parties, that he who should distinguish himself by his superior valor and wisdom should unanimously be acknowledged the sovereign elect. A spacious list, or circus, was pitched upon, surrounded with commodious seats, erected in an amphitheatrical manner, and richly embellished some few leagues from the city. Thither the combatants or champions were to repair, completely accoutred. Each of them had a distinct apartment to himself behind the lists, where no soul could either see them or know who they were. They were to enter the lists several times. Those who were so happy as to conquer 4 competitors were afterwards to engage each other in single combat, in order that he who should remain master of the field should be proclaimed the happy victor. 4 days afterwards they were to meet again, accoutred as before, and to explain all such enigmas or riddles as the Magi should think proper to propose. If their queries should prove too intricate and perplexed for them to resolve, they were to have recourse to the lists again, and after that to fresh enigmas, before they could be entitled to the election, so that the tournaments were to be continued till one of the candidates should be twice a victor, and shine as conspicuous, with respect to his internal qualities, as to his dexterity and address in heroic achievements. The Queen, in the meantime, was to be narrowly watched, and allowed only to be a spectator of both their amusements, at some considerable distance, and moreover to be covered with a veil. Nor was she indulged so far as to speak one single word to any candidate whomsoever, in order to prevent the least jealousy or suspicion either of partiality or injustice. Astarte took care, by the courier, to inform her lover of all the preliminary articles above mentioned, not doubting but that he would exert both his courage and understanding for her sake, beyond any of the other competitors. Zadig accordingly set out for Babylon, and besought the goddess Venus, not only to fortify his courage, but to illuminate his mind with wisdom on this important occasion. The night before these martial achievements were to commence, Zadig arrived upon the banks of the Euphrates. He inscribed his device amongst the list of combatants, concealing, at the same time, both his person and name, as the laws of the election required, and accordingly withdrew to the apartment that was provided for him, according to his lot. Cador, who was just returned to Babylon, having hunted all Egypt over to no purpose in hopes to find his friend Zadig, brought a complete set of armor into his lodge, by express orders from the Queen. She sent him likewise one of the finest horses in all Persia. Zadig knew that these presents could come from nobody but his dear Astarte, which redoubled his vigor and his hopes. The next morning, the Queen being seated under a canopy of state, enriched with precious stones, and the amphitheatres being crowded with gentlemen and ladies of all ranks and conditions from Babylon, the competitors made their personal appearance in the circus. Each of them went up to the Grand Magus, and laid down his particular device at his feet. The devices were drawn by lot. That of Zadig was the last. The first that advanced was a grandee, one Itobad by name, immensely rich, indeed, and very haughty, but no ways courageous, exceedingly awkward, and a man of no acquired parts. The sycophants that hovered round about him flattered him, that a man of his merit couldn't fail of being king. He imperiously replied, "One of my merit must be king," whereupon he was armed cap à pie. His armour was made of pure gold, enamelled with green. The housings of his saddle were green, and his lance embellished with green ribbons. Every one was sensible, at first sight, by Itobad's manner of managing his horse, that he was not the man whom heaven had pitched upon to sway the Babylonish sceptre. The first combatant that tilted with him threw him out of the saddle. The second flung him quite over the crupper, and laid him sprawling on the ground with his heels quivering in the air. Itobad, 'tis true, remounted, but with so ill a grace that a universal laugh went round the amphitheatre. The third, disdaining to use his lance, made only a feint at him, then catched hold of his right leg, and whirling him round, threw him flat upon the sand. The esquires, who were the attendants, ran to his assistance, and with a sneer remounted him. The fourth combatant catched hold of his left leg, and unhorsed him again. He was conveyed through the hissing multitude to his lodge, where, according to the law in that case provided, he was to pass the night. And as he hobbled along, said he to the esquires, "What a sad misfortune is this to one of my birth and character!" The other champions played their parts much better, and all came off with credit. Some conquered 2 of their antagonists, and others were so far successful as to get the better of 3. None of them, however, except Prince Hotam, vanquished 4. Zadig, at last, entered the lists, and dismounted all 4 opponents, one after the other, with the utmost ease, and with such an air and grace as gained him universal applause. As the case stood thus, Zadig and Hotam were to close the day's entertainment in a single combat. The armour of the latter was of a blue colour mixed with gold, and the housings of his saddle were of the same, those of the former white as snow. The multitude were divided in their wishes. The knight in blue was the favourite of some of the ladies, and others again were admirers of the cavalier in white. The queen, whose heart was in a perfect palpitation, put up her secret prayers to Venus, to assist her darling hero. The 2 champions making their passes and their voltas with the utmost dexterity and address, and keeping firm in their saddles, gave each other such rebuffs with their lances, that all the spectators, the queen only excepted, wished for 2 kings of Babylon. At last, their horses being tired, and both their lances broke, Zadig made use of the following stratagem, which his antagonist wasn't any way apprised of. He got artfully behind him, and shooting with a spring on his horse's buttocks, grasped him close, threw him headlong on the sand, then jumped into his seat, and wheeled round Prince Hotam, while he lay sprawling on the ground. All the spectators in general, with loud acclamations, cried out, "Victory! Victory!" in favour of the champion in white. Hotam, incensed to the last degree, got up and drew his sword. Zadig sprang from his horse with his sabre in his hand. Now behold the 2 chieftains upon their legs, commencing a new trial of skill, where they seemed to get the better of each other alternately, for both were strong, and both were active. The feathers of their helmets, the studs of their bracelets, their coats of mail, flew about in pieces, through the dry blows which they 1,000 times repeated. They struck at each other sometimes with the edge of their swords, at other times they pushed, as occasion offered, now on the right, then on the left, now on the head, then at the breast. They retreated, they advanced, they kept at a distance, they closed again, they grasped each other, turning and twisting like 2 serpents, and engaged each other as fiercely as 2 Libyan lions fighting for their prey. Their swords struck fire almost at every blow. At last, Zadig, in order to recover his breath, for a moment or 2 stood still, and afterwards, making a feint at the prince, threw him on his back and disarmed him. Hotam, thereupon, cried out, "O thou knight of the white armour! 'Tis you only are destined to